All right, good evening, everybody. Let's see if we get everything set here. We got the fire, good microphone, hopefully. We have overcome those challenges and have a great night for this, too. Good cold weather out there, so my fire feels that much more warm. Not warmer, no, warmer. Help me out with my English. It feels warmer. Okay, everybody, just in case you didn't know, I'm terrible at grammar. I know, that's awful. All that good stuff. Let's see, I want to make sure I share this with my other pages. So let's see here. By the way, I put a link to the latest interview I did was on LifeSite News, which is a great website, by the way, lifesitenews.com. You ought to check that out. They have some really good stuff on there, and I'm not just saying that because they have me on often. They have other people much smarter than me. But, hey, Sandra, I see you on there. Please tell your whole family howdy. Kevin's already joined us. All right, lots of good folks kicking in here. Let me make sure I share to my other page, and then I will dive in. I don't know that I really have an agenda tonight. There is one topic I definitely want to discuss, and then we'll toss it out to you guys and let y'all decide where you want to go from there. But it is the title that we put on the live there is essentially tells you, yeah, I tell you what, Facebook, even though we're still here, they are definitely making it difficult on me to share things. And hey, Yvette, can't get half of my... by the way, Yvette, tell Garrett I got his email introducing me to somebody, and I'm so sorry I haven't responded yet. I'm down to 580 emails, and I'm working my way there, and he's in the top 30. So I'm getting there. We will get there soon. Let's see here. Okay, let's try sharing. I'm trying to get this on my personal page. I don't usually share it there, but I'm gonna try to do that tonight. There we go. Okay, and then one more click. All right. Let's jump in. Listen, I am, there's a lot that's happened since our last Sunday night Facebook Live, but if you missed last night, I was really excited to have my friend Mark Meckler with me, and we sat here together on either side of the fire, and we had a really good discussion about the great decoupling, about how we could go about some of these things, some of the free speech issues, Parler. I was excited to learn that Mark's really knows all those guys, and Parler's back up today, by the way. It's not where you can interact yet, but their website is back up, and the CEO has a statement on that page, and they are rapidly getting. TJ said he left Meckler's battle cry to join us. Meckler's not done yet? Wait, are you saying he went over because he's supposed to be disciplined and only go 30 minutes and finishes at 7:30 so that I don't cut into his, but you're telling me he didn't finish. So, he's usually done by then. So I just have to say, Mark, come on, man. You got to talk faster. I'm the long-winded one here that goes on and on and on forever. Anyway, okay. Let's see here. Got my chat up, and I am good to go. There really is a clampdown on civil discourse. And I chose that way of describing this because, I'm just a big believer in the ability to seek truth through discussion, that iron does sharpen iron, that you do sharpen each other's countenance when you can have debate, when you can have discussion that allows you to verify your own convictions, verify what you believe, and put your own perspective to the test. I often find that my perspective can be colored by my own experiences or my own biases, and when you're dealing with national issues and you're dealing with policy issues and you're dealing with things that are going to affect so many and passionate issues, that's even easier to have happen. And I would think we all want to be driven by a hunger for truth. And unfortunately, that is not true. That is not a truth for a large chunk of America anymore. There used to be a sense of righteousness in not acting on bad information or not leading others astray. That used to be an important value. again, cheesy example maybe. I say again to all my Patriot Academy grads out there that might be joining us tonight, but I mean the Superman theme. Superman theme was always truth, justice, and the American way. How do you get justice if you aren't willing to have your currency be truth? If your currency is emotion and your currency is whatever you can whip people into to do, then you don't have truth, and therefore you can't have justice. And frankly, that used to mean you didn't have the American way. And unfortunately, that has changed. The American way has changed radically in just a few short years. So I'm actually working on an article on this. I'm going to call it Civil Discourse or Civil War, because I'm beginning to think that's our only options. I think we're down to those two. If we don't come back to civil discourse, we will end up in civil war. We have got to come back to the place where we can sit across a table from each other, and whatever our differences, we can discuss them. If we have been hired as the representative of the people, that we can discuss in a legislative chamber, that we in the arena of ideas and the marketplace of ideas and the free market of what used to be a wonderful opportunity in cyberspace to discuss whatever we wanted to talk about and discuss what we believe, and even as outlandish as someone's claims might be, that we could have the opportunity to push back a little and challenge that and say, how'd you come to that conclusion and what's your evidence for that? And I mean, that was a bedrock principle of our republic, our constitutional republic. It's why the First Amendment is enshrined right there. It's why freedom of religion, that's the right of conscience to believe what you believe and to be able to act on that, live on that, to speak that. That's why freedom of speech right there in the First Amendment, freedom of assembly, of course, peaceable assembly, which we have always said. And, those things used to be valued at such a high level that if someone was pushing against that, man, there would be outcry, and people would say, what are you doing? That's bad for freedom. That's bad for our republic. And that's where we are. That's where we find ourselves. We have to look back in time to say there was a time in America where you could, if somebody threw out an idea or even they threw out a claim, you could debate it and talk about the pros and the cons. If someone proposed something to be policy, that you could point out potential unintended consequences. You could research and then point to times in the past where that had been tried, attempted, and either had success or failure, and use that to either back up the proposal or destroy the other's argument for it. I mean, that's how you sharpened each other, and that's how you usually got to hopefully the right answer, because everybody was searching for truth. At least you could get to some level of understanding. Okay, I see how you got there. I don't agree with all of your presuppositions, and I don't agree with your conclusion, but at least I can understand how you got there, and then we can disagree on the ultimate conclusion. We used to call that civil discourse. And so RIP civil discourse, rest in peace, because it is dead in America right now. There is no civil discourse. And my premise tonight is to say that if civil discourse is not resuscitated, if it is not restored in America, there's no saving the republic. There is no preventing a civil war, because you've got two very different groups right now in America. And those two groups, if they cannot have civil discourse, and frankly, if you can't have civil discourse within the group, because neither of the two sides in America, blue or red, neither of the two sides are lockstep uniform, right? On the left, you clearly have differences between the AOC Bernie Sanders crowd and, oh, no, that's right, there is no difference. They've all bought into the AOC Bernie Sanders crowd. I guess you don't have diversity on the other side. No, listen, there are Democrats on that do not buy into the radical leftist agenda. I mean, I can name a bunch of them for you. There's Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin does not buy into the AOC, Nancy Pelosi leftist crowd. Joe Manchin is the moderate voice. He's the one we all thought would be the one to, possibly even caucus with the Republicans in order to prevent the radical agenda from taking place. He was the one everybody was saying would say no to impeachment. You're not going to impeach again. that would say no. You're going to dismiss Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz because they did what we did just a few years ago? Joe Manchin was the one that was going to say no to all that. And apparently today, or I guess last night, he said, yeah, we should definitely look at 14th Amendment claims to toss Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, kick them out of the United States Senate for objecting to electors. That's the moderate voice in the Democrat Party. So I don't know if they still have debate on their side and civil discourse on their side, or if it's just we threaten to run you out of town if you don't believe like us. I think on our side, maybe we have to say the same thing, that we don't have civil discourse on the right either, on the red side, because we are dismissing each other. Ben Sass, in his article in The Atlantic, is basically saying that if you don't believe exactly like him, that you're going to destroy the Republican Party. Now, I agree with some of the things he said in the article. I completely agree with the idea that if you don't say no to some of the radical conspiracy theories out there, if leaders in our movement are not willing to stand up and say that is wrong, or there's no evidence for that, or don't put your faith in this thing over here that there's no evidence for, if our leader's not willing to say that, then he's right. Conspiracy theories will destroy our movement and our side. So I think he's right on that point. But then he jumps to the conclusion that if you questioned the election at all, then you're part of that crowd. So we can't be there either. So if you can't have civil discourse on our side, if we can't sit down with each other, even on the Republican side or conservative, whatever label you want to use, and talk this thing through and go, okay, look, if you think that, show me the evidence. If I think this, I'll show you the evidence. We've got to be able to do that even within our own movement, let alone within the nation as a whole. So I am significantly concerned for our side as well, but more so even for the nation. So let me just try to set this up, the two sides as I see it. You got those on the red side, if you will. In the red corner, we have a massive number of America. I would argue more than half, but let's just go with the typical narrative that we're split right down the middle. It's roughly 80 million to 80 million. All right. If that's the case, you've got a massive number of people over here, half the country, with a common thread. They're diverse. This is a very different group of people. This is not all evangelical Christian like I am, not all faith-driven people. Mostly would claim to be faith-driven, but a massive number that are much more libertarian, secular, just leave me alone and let me run my life. Different groups, right? It's what Grover Norquist always called the leave me alone crowd. Everybody on this side tends to agree, government, leave us alone and let us live our lives as we see fit. But the common thread on this side is a love of freedom. It's part of the DNA of what we would call patriotic Americans. And for that group, our view that the laws of nature and nature's God is what is true, that prevents us from submitting to a new normal that is void of those basic rights that are laid out in our Declaration and in our Constitution. So we are not willing to live in a new normal where we do not have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to petition our government for redress of grievance, which includes rallies and includes writing letters and includes showing up to testify. We are not willing to live in a country where we can't have the freedom of assembly and due process and self-defense of our property and our person and our family. There's a host of other freedoms we could talk about, but all of which we've taken for granted in America. Let's be honest. We've taken for granted these things until we've seen them disappear over the last year. And so for this side, on the red side, in the red corner, if you will, there is not any chance that we're going to submit to a new normal that strips those freedoms. There's just not a chance of that happening. And so you have to have some agreement with both sides that those basic freedoms found in the Constitution will be defended for all Americans and be defended equally. And speaking of the word equally, in the blue corner, we have half the country that is yearning for justice and equality, and they are defining that. It's a redefinition of justice and equality that is redefined by a modern Marxist terminology and definition, But that is it's a passionate, I think, well-meaning for many of them, passionate cry for millions of Americans for justice and equality. And you cannot dismiss that any longer. I cannot I frankly dismissed a lot of this as being the musings of left-wing professors being taught to students, but not taking hold, that somehow the American ideals and values was pushing back on that. You can't say that anymore. And you can't say that it's just the battle cry of the rioters, violent rioters of the last 8 months who've burned down American cities. You can't say that it, and they're still doing that, by the way. You can't say that that's just a few. I mean, their battle cry for justice and equality is something that millions of Americans agree with. And they also agree with, apparently, the radical leftist views and tactics that I only know how to list as racial preferences. I mean, that is now the view for the left. It is no longer equality for all races. It is putting some races over others, which is, of course, racism, but they don't use that term. They call that equality and making up for things that happened hundreds of years ago. They are for silencing opposition. They are for criminalizing peaceful speech. They are for income distribution. And this is not just a radical crowd. Those are the views and now actions, stated purposes of the, in just a few days, President of the United States, Vice President of the United States, the new majority leader in the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. So that's a pretty high-level group of politicians there. So that's a pretty significant difference of opinion. It's a completely opposite worldview. And as we have been clashing for the last year, for longer underneath, but clearly clashing for the last year, there's been some very serious accusations made from both sides and from the fringe of both sides. And so that's kind of where I want to take this tonight, because the accusations that have been made from whoever on whatever side then get repeated in the echo chambers of the two sides, and the accusations become truth to certain people in each side, to millions literally on each side, and there's never an actual discussion about how did you come to that conclusion. There's not a challenge on that, what becomes a belief. And that is a very, very dangerous place. It is definitely a place where these two groups will not survive together for maybe, within a year. I mean, that's how bad that is. So let me just, I'm going to list a few. I wrote these down. I try to think of some of the beliefs now of the two sides based on accusations that came initially from fringe, I think. Most of these, some of these were not fringe. They were, from main speakers on each side. Let me just read through a few of these. Okay, first one. America is systemically racist. Cops are routinely killing black Americans without cause, and there is no justice in our legal system. All white people are racist, even if their beliefs and their actions are not racist. The burning of our cities and billions of dollars in property damage is a justifiable, quote, airing of grievances. Okay, that's a serious accusation, set of accusations, and now belief system for a lot of people. Second one I'll throw out there, COVID-19 is going to kill everyone, so we must give up our rights, destroy our economy, and accept a new normal, maybe forever. Okay, that's literally believed by a ton of people. That's why they're acting in fear. All right, COVID crackdowns were used by the Democrat Party to destroy the economy so they could defeat Donald Trump. The only reason that any non-pharmaceutical interventions, the technical term for what's been happening around the country since March, the only reason for any of it was to defeat Donald Trump. That's an accusation that's out there. Another accusation, President Trump is responsible for the deaths of over 200,000 Americans because he refused to do anything about COVID. Fifth accusation, Democrats stole the presidential election by counting illegal votes, unconstitutionally changing election law, and manipulating electronic voting machines from as far away as Italy and China. Number 6, 150 members of the United States House and Senate, that's more than 1/3 of the entire Congress, are guilty of treason and sedition for questioning the results of the presidential election and asking for verification. By objecting to electoral votes of disputed states, these members caused the violence at the Capitol on January 6th. Seventh accusation. A pedophile ring at the highest levels of government is the reason our government is corrupt. Eighth, President Donald Trump whipped a crowd of thousands into a frenzy and encouraged them to ransack the Capitol, kidnap members of Congress, and hang Mike Pence if he refused to decertify the electors. Last one I'll throw out there. The Biden family made millions from foreign countries, and President Joe Biden could be blackmailed by China and other nations. That's some pretty extreme accusations from both sides. I mean, any one of those we could debate for the rest of the night, right? Those are serious. Just let them sink in for a moment. Just think about some of those. Each one that I've listed tonight, every one of those 9, has a support base of people that believe it in their core to the tune of millions. Some of those even believed by tens of millions. Some of those believed by our highest level. Fire is exploding behind me. They're coming for us. Some of those believed by some of our highest level officials. Now, most of you watching probably, and me, believe at least a part of one or two of those or several of those, right? I'm not going to tell you which ones I truly believe and which ones I think, I want more evidence on that. Well, maybe we can. We'll talk about each of them. But that brings us to the whole point of what I'm trying to do tonight. How do you know? How do you verify any of those claims? How do you prove the crazy ones false? And how do you advocate for the ones that you come to believe to be true? We can't do that without civil discourse. I mean, that is the whole point. That if somebody's going to throw out these crazy accusations, we need the opportunity to discuss them. We need the opportunity in the open to debate them. Not on some secret level website. Not in just some secret intelligence committee in the Capitol. We need to be able to discuss these things openly in a free speech way, in dialogue with our fellow Americans. So I would argue, without civil discourse, you can't even determine if your own views are correct. I can't determine if my views are correct if we don't have the chance to go back and forth. So as I was writing these claims down, all I could think was, man, there is no civil discourse if you don't have free speech. There is no civil discourse when someone's going to call you a seditionist just for asking for civil discourse. Think about it. How do you have civil discourse if I ask for debate and I ask for a hearing or I ask for an opportunity to investigate or to at least discuss something and have a vote on it? I am now a seditionist. Civil discourse asking for civil discourse equals sedition and treason. There's no civil discourse when you shout down opposing views. I mean, does anybody think it's okay to just shout down someone that disagrees with you and not even give them the chance to say their piece? There's no civil discourse when we interrupt congressional debate with foolish and violent protesters. Think about what happened. We stopped the debate. Whoever did what they did stopped the debate. Granted, it picked up later, but it totally changed the atmosphere, totally changed the votes. There's no civil discourse when people are removed from civil discourse for simply saying, I have a question. Mr. Professor, how did you come to that conclusion? And hey, what about this thing that happened? How do we have civil discourse if you kick someone out of Congress for saying, I'd like the opportunity to object in the same way that you, Madam Speaker, objected just a few years ago. Same issue, same exact objection. I'd just like to repeat what you did, and now I'm the seditionist for doing that. No civil discourse whenever rioters are burning police cars, burning cities, and destroying a federal courthouse. It's hard to have civil discourse when that's going on. This one's going to hit close to home for some of you. There's no civil discourse when you call the vice president a traitor for following what was one of several constitutionally defensible options before him. There's no civil discourse when one side seeks to impeach, remove, censure, or silence anyone that opposes them, and even if that opposition is doing exactly what that side had done themselves. I mean, that is obviously the height of hypocrisy. We've all said that. We've seen that. I mean, we know that. They don't care. So there is no civil discourse if they're willing to be that hypocritical. And in fact, be indignant, righteously indignant, as they silence us for doing the very same thing that they have done over the years. And I'm talking about the parliamentary rules, procedures, motions, requests for a commission, requests to simply look at evidence, a vote against certification if you don't have the opportunity or you're convinced by the evidence. Those are the things that people are being threatened with being removed from office for. All right, so that's my setup for tonight. I know that's a long setup for tonight. I am just advocating for us to stop, slow down, take a deep breath, allow other people in our lives to give input and have discussion, and then as a nation start relying on free speech and peaceful assembly and letting people actually speak their minds, make fools of themselves if what they're saying is idiotic, counter them with logic and speech rather than with force, with removal and kicked off of platforms and threats of jail time and deprogramming. That's my premise for tonight. I hope you're putting some questions in here. You guys, I know, are looking at that. I've had conversations with some of you, questioning comments that I've made over the weeks, and I appreciate that. Reach out to me. It helps me to get a better view of what's going on. We can take any one of those claims that were made and ask questions about how did you come to that conclusion? Is that actually possible? But we've got to become known for our civil discourse, not for our crazy theories, throwing out stuff. I mean, there are people right now that really do think, and I may be proven totally wrong on this, they really do think that the military buildup in D.C., and I get it, it is kind of weird, 30,000 troops have been assembled in Washington, D.C. for a virtual inauguration. Seems kind of weird, but, I mean, look, there are people that are texting me on a regular basis saying, is Trump going to declare martial law? Is there going to be, a big shoe to drop? Trust the plan, whatever. I mean, that suddenly something big is going to happen. And I may get shocked. You guys, I'll throw down the gauntlet right now. Where is the evidence that something like that is going to happen? Where is the evidence for anything other than this is a show of force so that they can try to diminish, and they're trying to build up in people's minds that this was necessary because of the, quote, American patriots, because lovers of liberty like you and me, because we were peaceful at the January 6th event, and then some people on the fringe of our movement, and we got to say it, they were part of, quote, our movement, if you want to say so, because some of them had shown up at some of our rallies. Some of them were not part of our movement. They were antagonists and Antifa, and you can dismiss me for saying that, but go look at the pictures. Clearly, BLM activists and Antifa folks have been arrested. A son of a Democrat judge, the son himself, a Democrat, dressed up with Trump clothes with his friend who was the one carrying the Confederate flag. They were not Trump supporters, not Republicans. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that there are crazy people that were in that group, but there's also evidence that it was some of our people. So all I'm saying is, those crazy people, yes, we absolutely say that was wrong. But to the hundreds of thousands that gathered peaceably, we say you did the right thing. You were exercising your rights. I can't remember where I was going with that. Does anybody know where I was going with that? What was I leading up to? I totally got off track on all the crazy people that were there. And by the way, I saw a new video tonight of the goofy Shamron, whatever his name is, this guy thinks he's an alien. The dude with the what do you call him? The horns? The buffalo horns? Yeah. Go watch the goofy video of him explaining how he's an alien that is sent here to ward off other aliens in order to have, peace the guy's a nut. He's an absolute nut. And because he's a follower of Q, and because the other guy that went in first and had his shirt with his big Q and trust the plan on, somehow those two guys represent the entire conservative movement and all patriots in America and everybody that ever voted for Trump. I don't even think those two guys represent all of the people that follow Q. And by the way, I'm learning about this whole Q thing. I had no clue what all of this was about. I had no idea how many people read those things that got put out by whoever this Q person is. And the things that I've read that people have sent me in the last week or so are pretty generic statements. There's not anything special that they've revealed that I've seen. It's stuff that almost anybody would agree to if you just read, child pedophilia is wrong. If you just read that, we're patriots or whatever. So I'm studying. I'll learn more and try to figure out, again, with civil discourse, if there's any kernels of truth in some of this stuff versus outlandish claims. Now, the crazy stuff that I read from that is that, there's some plan that's going to suddenly happen and save the whole world, and it sounds like Trump's going to descend from a helicopter with a bazooka on one arm and save the day. Come on, don't go for that crazy stuff. I understand some of the basic information that gets out there. But where I was going with all that is that these guys that were willing to do what they were willing to do, misguided, partly because of a lack of civil discourse. That's why we shouldn't be doing this stuff secret on the internet and not having actual debates about what's the evidence for this. How much evidence do we have that some of these people were involved in some of the things that they were involved in? I mean, I have heard outlandish claims with zero evidence. Well, I understand. If you've got evidence that's making you make that claim, okay, let's have that discussion and show that evidence. But it's making our whole movement look crazy. So anyway, I'm getting off on tangents again. All I'm asking for is civil discourse and not just you're a seditionist if you don't agree with me. You're a traitor to the country if you don't agree with me. And look, I will say I have to really think about how I say things and make sure that I don't go to the extremes and say that if a certain person gets in office, the whole nation is doomed forever. I don't think I've ever said that. I hope I've never said that. And if I have ever said that, then I apologize, and I was wrong. What I do know that I've said often, and again, maybe I messed up somewhere and said it the opposite way, but what I've tried to always say, and I know for a fact said a lot, is that the future of America is not going to depend on one election. It's not going to depend on one president. One president cannot destroy this nation. And even as bad as things are right now, and where I do think we are at a fork in the road of where we're going to go, it's not going to be Joe Biden that destroys us. It's going to be that we destroyed ourselves because we were not willing to study the things we needed to study, to change the civil ignorance in our country, to have the civil disobedience necessary, to be the salt and light that the church needs to be engaged whenever we saw the left indoctrinating our children. We weren't willing to make the hard decisions to not send our kids and our money to these schools that were sold out to the leftist agenda. We weren't willing to take our kids out of public schools that were teaching a lot of this stuff. And I understand not every public school is doing that, but look, most are. I mean, that's just the truth. So if you're fortunate enough to teach in or send your kids to a school that doesn't teach the 1619 Project, that didn't suddenly have a new curriculum last week after the riots at the Capitol that immediately started blaming Donald Trump and all conservatives and all patriots, if your school didn't do those things, then great. Awesome for you. And that's one of the few that's left. But we haven't been willing to make the hard decisions. We haven't been willing to leave the churches that aren't willing to be salt and light and aren't willing to preach truth and talk about application of the Bible to everything in our lives, and instead have 52 salvation sermons a year. So it's our fault. That's what I'm saying. We are the problem. We're the reason that we're in this mess. We're the reason that the other side has been able to get to where they are. We're the reason the wolf is not just at the door, but in the house. So we can blame, but it's time for us to look at ourselves and say, all right, what can I do? Well, first thing you can do is become a part of the civil discourse. Let's have a renewal of civil discourse. Let's do the same thing William Wilberforce had to do. Not only was he for ending slavery, he was for a restoration of manners. He was for a restoration of civility, a restoration of literally being able to have these discussions and not call each other a seditionist just because they disagree. Now, do I think that the Marxist policies that are now becoming more and more common at the federal level and in some of our states will destroy the country? Yes, I do. Do I think that will happen overnight? No, I think it takes time. But I do think that as Mark Meckler said the other night, fascism comes on incredibly fast after it's been really slow for a while. So, I mean, you're seeing some of those things that will destroy our country. But I'm afraid that some people take that to mean, and if you've ever taken anything I said to mean, storm the Capitol and use violence to stop someone from being sworn in or elected in order to save the country, then you have totally misunderstood everything I've ever said. In fact, I've always said the peaceable means are at our fingertips to be able to save the nation. And so I say all of that to say we do need to dial back maybe the absolutism of some of those statements and say, okay, if this doesn't stop, if we do not shift the trend, and it takes years, I have always said that, this is a generational fight. We will not save America in one election. We have to start sowing the seeds of liberty again. We have to start teaching the seeds of liberty. So back to my first action step, become a part of the civil discourse. Create civil discourse in your living room or at your church. Host one of our Constitution classes, our biblical citizenship class. Get one of these classes going so that you can sit around with 5 or 6 neighbors or 25 people from your church and toss out these major issues and talk about them and let people express opposing views and then use reason and logic and facts and examples to counter and to sharpen each other. So that's number one, to use these action steps of actually bringing people together and having civil discourse, and then engage in civil discourse at the government level. Go to those committees at your state legislature and testify. Go to your city council and testify. Make the phone call or the letter to your elected official. And again, we've always said this. Don't send a letter, even when they're the opposing view, that is a snarky, sarcastic, if you don't do this, I'm coming for you, stupid stuff like that. Instead, say it in a way that you're going to hold them accountable, but say it in a way where you're asking them to consider the merits of the argument and to make the right decision. As a former legislator, I'm just telling you, you definitely get, what's the expression? More flies with honey. And you're not going to get a legislator to do what you want by trying to, be rude and mean to them. And I get the frustration too. I'm tired of politicians that don't listen as well. I'm tired of politicians that say something on the campaign trail and then do something different in office. I get that frustration level for sure. And yes, we should work to defeat them on the campaign trail. But I'm just saying, to be effective, let's come back to civil discourse, even when you're lobbying your legislator. So number one is create civil discourse opportunities in your living room and at your church by hosting one of our classes, by attending, wow, that was like a massive log fell behind me, by attending our constitutional defense course in Nevada, because that's a great opportunity to discuss things with other people. And I promise you, there's going to be differing views at our upcoming events. Daniel Horowitz is going to be with us there on February 7th. Well, Daniel and I don't agree on the tactics of what to do in the culture right now on every front. We agree on some big things and disagree on some things. So we're going to have a civil discussion in front of the group and take questions from the group. It's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to it. That one's February 7th. While I'm on that subject, in case I forget, somebody please put in the chat a link to be able to sign up, because we're down to hours. Well, I guess days. 4 days? 3 days. You have 3 days to sign up for the February 7th Constitutional Defense course. That's your chance to hang out with us for a few days in the classroom, talking about the Constitution, and then on the range, learning how to defend your family. We have some really good training there. So join us for a Constitutional Defense course February 7th. And if you want to meet Daniel Horowitz, that's the date you need to come to. There'll be another one on that starts on February 11th. So you got a few extra days to sign up for that one. And Daniel will be there on that first day, just for the first part of the day. So if you want to come in early, you can meet him. But anyway, February 7th, February 11th, those are the two February dates. And then we've got some later in the spring. But guys, it's getting crazy. So you better come get trained now. I don't know how much more crazy it's going to get. Okay. I have ranted. Man, thank you guys for letting me rant for 40 minutes. Did I rant for 40 minutes and not take a single question? Why did y'all let me do that? Because you're sitting over there enjoying your cigars and not giving me one. All right, go ahead. What do you got?
Few people have asked about the fact that obviously we push Convention of States very heavily, but
Yeah.
if they don't respect the current process, what makes us think that that's going to make any difference if we do get the change we want there?
Yeah, well, because the whole point of the Convention of States is to move the process to the state level so that you have a better chance of holding them accountable. So that I hear this all the time that a constitutional amendment will do no good because they're ignoring the Constitution right now. Well, that's absolutely ignoring all of American history. Every amendment that's ever been put into the Constitution has been followed and followed faithfully for decades and decades, sometimes centuries, and then chipped away at a little bit as the courts began to do their thing, right? And chip away at what things meant. So there is no you would have to give me evidence, maybe I should say that. How would you come to the conclusion that a constitutional amendment does not change things? If we amend the Constitution, that will be respected and followed by the United States Supreme Court. It'll be followed by Congress. They may work to try to change it, but it will be followed while they try to change it. So if we amend the Constitution to say that we are shifting, let's take some easy ones. We're shifting departments that are at the federal government back to the states. If we confirm in a constitutional amendment that there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes a Department of Education, so you have to stop the Marxist indoctrination of our kids through any federal programs. There's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes a Department of Agriculture and a bunch of other departments. So if we specifically say you can't have those departments at the federal level, I promise you, I mean, you're going to have to convince me that that would not be followed by the federal government. So I understand the frustration with them not following the Constitution, but here's the misnomer that we often have when we say that. They are following the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. So whichever side you're on, red or blue, okay, everybody claims to be following the Constitution. So those on the side, typically on the blue side, in the blue corner, are typically arguing that they're following the Constitution based on some Supreme Court decision. So what you were doing, and what usually the folks in the red corner are saying is, we want the Constitution followed based on what the Constitution says, and based on what the people that gave us the Constitution said, or if we're going to argue about the 14th Amendment, that debate's about to come up, right? Does the 14th Amendment actually allow you to remove Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and 150 House members, I suppose, for objecting to the electors? Does that fit within the original intent of the 14th Amendment, saying that you can kick people out of Congress if they participate in sedition? So we're going to have to debate, what did those words mean when they were put into the 14th Amendment, which means you open up the debates in Congress in the 1860s when it was passed, and in the state legislatures when it was ratified. That's what people on the right always argue for an interpretation of the Constitution. Once you do an amendment, now you have no Supreme Court interpretations of the amendment for the blue side to argue is some distorted view of the Commerce Clause or whatever. You've defined it with the amendment, and now they're going to have to follow. They will follow it as amended. And maybe over the years, the Supreme Court will chip away at it and change the meaning of it. That's why one of the amendments I think is so important is that any Supreme Court opinion can be overruled with a 2/3 vote of the states, which technically it can be now through an amendment to the Constitution, but we're trying to make that very clear because it's not being used by those legislators. So that would be my argument there. And I would just say, if you really believe that, then show me evidence of the Constitution being ignored, a constitutional amendment being ignored within 20 years of it being added to the Constitution. 10 years. I'll take 10 years of improvements in our country and then have to amend the Constitution again. But I think I'm trying to think of an amendment that hasn't been followed based on the intent of the amendment within 50 years of the amendment going in. I mean, most all of the distortions of the Constitution have come literally more than 100 years after either the Constitution itself or the amendment to the Constitution. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying, well, an amendment just buys time, but in a way, an amendment actually, it's a chess move that gives us victory on that particular area at least for 50 years, and it moves that issue back to the states. Now, whether you lose in your own state, I mean, that's the whole thing that we're driving for with the Convention of States is to take the battle away from Washington and to the individual states. And we're going to lose those battles in some of these states. And people are going to have to vote with their feet and decide where they want to live and what kind of state they want to live in. That's all we're asking for, is that there is instead of a divorce, there's a separation. that we're still together as a nation when it comes to the big fights, meaning when we're fighting radical Islamic terrorism or we're fighting the Chinese communists. We're together as a nation on those things. Just as you would gather with neighbors that you hate, but you would gather with them to ward off a marauding band of gangsters coming in to steal your children and your wives, right? You would gladly stand shoulder to shoulder with some guy that you have yelled at over the picnic table at the local park for the last 20 years, or who you had to coach against in Little League, and you can't stand them because you know that they cheated in that Little League championship game 20 years ago, right? I mean, you would team up with that guy to stop the gang from stealing your children. In the same way, I will gladly team up with California and Massachusetts and any state to fight off the Chi-Coms and fight off radical Islamic terrorism. That's the purpose of the federal government. That's what it was really intended to do, and to have that free flow of commerce between the states. If we can get back to that and then let the states do whatever they want individually, as long as they're not violating those basic rights, then I think there's a chance we save the country. So that's why we're for a convention of states, because that's the only peaceable constitutional tool to do that. And you just look at what's coming down the pike. I mean, on Wednesday, on the first day in office, Biden is already going to reverse a ton of Trump's executive orders. He's already going to start down the path of some pretty radical stuff. And you look at that caravan coming up from where's it coming from? It's not Nick. It was just in. Oh, where was it? I just saw the head. I just saw the video of them overrunning. Yeah, I saw that too. It's a massive. It's another one of these Latin America, massive caravans headed to America. And look, President of the United States is going to have the final say on what at least the national security, border agents do. Now, can Texas put their own people on the border and prevent that caravan from crossing into Texas? I would argue yes. In fact, we've done some pretty good border security in Texas. Can California do the same? They probably wouldn't, not with the leadership they have. Anyway, let the states do what they want to do, and then let's come together to stop things like that as a nation. It would make President of the United States so much less important. It'd make Supreme Court justices so much less important. And that's the only way we're going to save the nation. We are not going to survive. We have lost, okay? We have lost the culture war. Let me just announce it tonight, in case you're wondering. We have lost the culture war. The left has won. They won all of the institutions in America. They took them over, and they have indoctrinated 2 generations of Americans with their leftist philosophy. Now, shockingly, even with their victories and domination in the culture war, half of Americans haven't bought it. That tells you how bad their ideas are. That tells you how when you do have civil discourse and you have the opportunity to actually discuss what that idea that is being forced on us is, you can win people over. That's why in fact, I beg you to watch Dennis Prager's interview at Epic Times just from a few days ago. And he points out, why do you think the left wants to silence everybody? Because their ideas, as he put it, are like a balloon, and all you need is a pinprick. Once you put some reason and logic in there, you pop that balloon. You destroy that idea. That's why PragerU videos are so effective, and in 5 minutes, they'll destroy some leftist idea. That's why the left does their best to silence PragerU. But 1 billion views, massive impact, changing hearts and minds in 5 minutes with those videos. It has been happening for years, continues to happen, and that's why I do have hope for winning people over, despite the fact that we lost the culture war. But because we lost the culture war, and millions of people bought into it, it makes it virtually impossible to have American values now be, permeate the entire culture. You're going to have half the country that has non-American values for many years. And all we're asking is that the other half of the country be allowed to keep those American values and show you what can happen when you do the right things, when you put the good principles in. And you'll see those states that have those principles and those values flourish, while those states who adopt the non-American values are gonna fail. And what a convention of states will also prevent is it will prevent those states that are failing because of their bad policies from robbing your state and making you pay for their bad decisions. So that's another reason for the great decoupling that Mark Meckler calls it. It's another reason for shifting that power from the feds back to the states, to prevent the feds from being able to steal from one state to give to another state. So those are the reasons why it's so important. And I think we have to give that everything we've got. I don't think we can jump to, secession and civil war and all of these things. I think we have to do everything we can to hold the nation together nationally, but let it split apart in terms of its governing and policies in each state, which is exactly what the founders set up. It's exactly what the founders envisioned. So we're literally saying we're going to go back to a true federalism system instead of trying to make everybody the same all across the country. That's my view.
That was a long answer.
That was only 20 minutes. I only used 20 minutes for that answer. Is that a long answer?
Nah.
Did I have more than one prepositional phrase in that 20 minutes, or was that one long? Did I have a run-on sentence in it?
You started to touch on it right at the end, but address real quickly the importance from a moral high ground perspective for many of us whose instincts are to move towards a breakup, of at least trying convention of states, getting it successfully through, and if they ignore it at that point, then there is the moral high ground for some of the more radical actions. But until we've tried all of these options.
It's a really good way to put it too, Trey. I think my argument would be at the very least, we owe it to all the patriots that are all across the country. Because if you immediately ask for a separation and a national divorce and secession and all of those things, you're essentially leaving all those patriots behind enemy lines. And you are asking for a bloodbath. There is no, I cannot imagine a peaceful separation of the United States of America. I don't know how that, if you have a plan for that and you think there's a way to do that, I would love to hear it, because especially with the left in charge of the federal government, they will use the military. Look at the buildup in Washington, D.C. right now. Why are there 30,000 troops in Washington, D.C.? They will use the military to silence us and to prevent us from leaving the Union. And they'll argue this is what Lincoln did in order to end slavery, and we're going to do this, to keep the Union together. So I just don't see a peaceful way to go that direction. And so you're doing it out of a same thing the Founding Fathers did, that they made a concentrated effort to peacefully resolve the disputes within their nation. What nation were they? They were part of England. They worked for over a decade to beg, to plead, to lobby, to move towards peaceful resolutions, and genuinely wanted that to happen. And once they were fired upon, once they were attacked, that was when they said, "That's it. You've broken the deal," and we're obviously not going to be able to survive. But even then, folks, just think geographically for a minute. I would argue that it would be a less of a hurdle to climb to separate the colonies from Great Britain thousands of miles away than to try and separate. I mean, how are you going to carve up the United States? How are you geographically going to? You've got a lot of great patriots in eastern Washington. You've got a lot of great patriots in California. You've got red states spread out all over the place, and I don't know. I mean, I have thought about this. Believe me, we've had discussions around this fire about this, and there's not a good solution. And so it will, I think, out of respect for our fellow Americans spread out all over the country, we deserve a chance to let the states live like they want to live and restore freedom as they see fit. And that way people in Idaho can do it their way, we in Texas can do it our way, people in California can do it their way, and we can do it without a bloodbath and without complete destruction that will take decades to recover from. So that's my argument.
A lot of questions on the sanctuary county, and a lot of questions just on feeling despondent with everything going on and wanting a plan of action moving forward. Do you want to incorporate those two questions into one?
Sure. Let's talk about that. I am very much for the sanctuary county movement. I had my own reminder Friday of why that is so important. I had a standoff at the bank, so it was. I didn't tell you about this. Yeah, it was. It was not an armed. It was not an armed standoff. It was, but it was over the mask. I was trying to quietly and nonchalantly and with my head in my phone, get in, make a quick deposit, and get out. They closed the drive-thru, so I couldn't do the drive-thru. Not meaning they closed it for the day; they shut it down. So if you don't, anyway. So I was accosted over the mask thing, and told I couldn't even make my deposit, even though they were halfway through doing the deposit. I just basically said, I'm withdrawing every penny I've got in this bank tomorrow if you force me to wear a mask to simply make this deposit. This was after I had very sweetly, I really was. I was sweet about it. Said, it's okay. Everything's okay. You'll be fine. I'll be fine. Keeping my 6 feet. I'm not a threat to anybody. Don't have any symptoms. Don't have COVID. Everybody's fine. And I was, talking about the evidence and the studies, having a nice, I was sweet. Let me tell you, I don't have a sweet side normally, but I was sweet. And so after all of that, when I was finally pushed up to, no, take your deposit and leave the building right now. You cannot make your deposit in our bank. This was a pretty big deposit. You cannot make your deposit in our bank unless you put a mask on. And so I finally said, I'm leaving. I'm pulling out of this bank every penny I've got and moving to another bank. And it's a fairly significant sum when you consider all the different accounts of everything we're involved in. Surprisingly, at that point, I was told, she'll finish your deposit, and I'm going to get you a flyer on why you need to have a mask next time you come in. So
Does it all
I don't.
back to money?
I guess it all comes back to money, But you know what I should have done, and I thought about this later. I had two other courses of action. I've seen other people do that. I think works pretty well. I should have said, can you tell me why? Why do I need to wear a mask? And get them to at least state whatever their reasons are. Well, it's just our policy. Well, that's certainly not good enough. Why is this your policy? And try to get them to think through what is the mask going to do and all of that. And then the second thing I could have done was simply said, oh, I need a mask. Why? Do you have COVID right now in this building? Is that why I need a mask? Because I don't have COVID, and you're not. Even if you have COVID, you're not showing symptoms, and all the science says that there's no risk to me if you're not showing. Anyway, I should have probably gone that direction. I didn't go that way, but
I don't think they're interested in that.
they aren't. No, they're caught up in it right now. They're on autopilot. Anyway, it just reminded me. I want a sanctuary county. I want a county where a sheriff is saying we're not going to enforce this. And where there will be banks that will say, we're normal people and we've read the science and we're going to let you come in here and make your deposit without a mask, even if they want to do social distancing, which I also think is nuts. But if they want, and I'm not saying that, I'm not even going to name the bank, but its initials are Wells Fargo. If I'm not even.
Wait, that's the name of the bank.
I know. I was kidding. That's an old joke. I mean, it's an old thing where you say, I'm not gonna say his name, but his initials are Red Hudson. I mean, that's how you normally when you're saying something bad about somebody. Anyway, I mean, I love Wells Fargo, to be honest with you. I mean, their systems work great. We've been with them forever. But I want to move to a sanctuary county where a local bank can service all of our banking needs, and we can bless them by having our money in their bank and doing business with them. And they respect our freedom, and they don't fall for this craziness.
Hey, Jamie in the chat said move to Gillespie County.
Oh,
ask Jamie how Gillespie.
Jamie, please send me info. All right, email me rick@patriotacademy.com. Send me information on why you think I should move to Gillespie County, because Gillespie County is in the top 5 counties in Texas that we are looking at to move to and make a sanctuary county out of it. But I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm concerned about Gillespie because the city of Fredericksburg has done some goofy stuff with mask mandates and everything. I don't know much about what the county judge has done or the sheriff, and I would love to know if they have been rational and refused to implement some of this craziness. So let me know, because Gillespie County is one that we would love to consider. So anyway, Sanctuary County movement is alive and well. There's one in Michigan already that has declared no implementation of any of this stuff, and also one in Colorado. The sheriffs have come out and said, we're not participating in any of that, and I forget the names of the counties, but if you listen to Daniel Horowitz's show on Friday, which I was actually on, so you should listen to it anyway because we had a great time. So listen to Daniel Horowitz from Friday. That's January 15th, the Daniel Horowitz show, which is called Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz. And he talks about those two counties. So anyway, it's starting to take off. They did not yet adopt the Declaration of Rights that Daniel started with and that I've been working on, and we still don't have. And I'm just sorry. Like Daniel said on Friday, I'm one guy. I'm trying to do all that I can, and I haven't been able to get that completed. It is on the list, and we hope to get to it soon. But as I've said for a while, what you can do already is call your county judge, and I know you'd rather have the declaration when you call them, but you can at least say, or go take your sheriff to lunch and just say, hey, where are you on all this kind of stuff? Do you really think that we need to be implementing all this? And are you willing to say no and not use your resources at all for mass mandates, for shutting down any businesses based on anything to do with COVID? And just go ahead and start having conversations with some of you. Your sheriff, and you're able to go have that conversation, or your county commissioner, or your county judge. And hopefully soon we'll have the declaration, which will make it easier to have that conversation. But Sanctuary County movement, yes, it's still in the works, and I wish I had more for you tonight. But you had a second part to that question. You said to work it in, and I forgot what the second part was.
A plan moving forward. People were feeling kind of despondent and wondering what to do,
yes.
And just what part that plays in there.
I put my coffee up here like we were out on a campfire, and because that thing will melt in just a few minutes. Okay. Yeah, listen, I mean, the despondency, I understand. I'm not going to dismiss it at all. I mean, look at what's happening, folks. This is shocking, the things that are happening in our country right now, the things that are happening in our Congress right now. And it's going to get worse. Like I said last week, you're going to be taken. Actually, you know what? I've been doing that all wrong because I got to thinking about it. In the movie, Liam Neeson doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, they're going to take you. That's what he says. I should be using that line. Why did y'all let me mess that up? They're going to take you. And let me tell you, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they're going to take you for millions and billions and trillions. They're going to put us further in debt. They're going to implement incredibly bad policies. They're probably going to get away with 11 million illegal immigrants being given citizenship in the next 2 years. You can see it coming. I am not convinced that's 11 million Democrat guaranteed votes, depending on how we sell our values to those folks once they are citizens. I'm not for citizenship for illegal immigrants. I think you do it the right way, as most immigrants say. Go stand in the line. Do this the right way before you get it. Anyway, they're going to do this crazy stuff, folks. It's going to get darker before it gets better. So knowing that up front, being realistic about what is happening, I think helps get past the despondency quicker, right? Because once you say, yes, stop buying into all these crazy theories that, suddenly some miraculous thing is going to happen. Not that God couldn't do that. Don't hear me wrong on that, all right? God could definitely perform a miracle and save America. Do you really think America deserves a miracle right now? Let's be honest. Should God intervene in the mess that is America right now? I don't think so. I think if he does, then, the children of Israel ought to be pretty upset with us, because we've done a whole lot worse than what they did. So anyway, I don't expect, and you should not put your hope in some crazy thing to happen between now and Wednesday at noon. Okay. So once you realize that, once you put away these false, what Rob McCoy called in his sermon last week, hopium ideas, once you stop that and start being practical and say, we are in a difficult time. And it is not as difficult as some of our forefathers have faced. So that's the other thing. Number one, realize it is going to be tough, but use a little contrast that makes sense. We're not yet in a civil war that 600,000 died in. That would be millions today based on our population. We are not even in a world war where hundreds of thousands of our people are having to go and die in a war. So be thankful for what's not happening right now in our nation and realize that as bad as it is, we do still have the peaceable means to turn this thing around. Now, I don't hold out an illusion that we're going to turn it around and it's suddenly going to be the 1950s and everybody's, singing Kumbaya and laughing at Andy Griffith shows and thinking that everything's hunky-dory. I don't have an illusion that that's going to happen. But I do believe we can turn things around over time to the point that we can get back to living in freedom. And that in certain states and certain sanctuary counties, even sooner rather than later, we can restore some of those basic freedoms that have been taken, to use the movie phrase. And so because I believe that, I can move forward as a happy warrior and say it's going to be ugly, it's going to be tough, but the formula is there. And it coming full circle. Oh, coming full circle. See if I can touch this without getting burned. Coming full circle, it starts with civil discourse. It starts with being able to hey, that worked pretty good. Yeah. It starts with being able to seek truth, speak that truth, and fight for that truth. So to seek that truth, bring people together in your living room. Get people together at church. Have civil discourse on Facebook if you want. I'm not one that says just get off social media completely, though you'd probably be a lot more joyful and happier. I think those are tools that we can still use. Moderate it, be careful, don't spend all your time there, but just engage in civil discourse, have conversations, have fellowship, talk about the tough issues of the day with other people, and start talking about the answers that we talk about here, that we give you in the Constitution classes and the biblical citizenship classes. So the only reason people get despondent and feel like there's no hope is because they don't look at some of the solutions and they don't look in the context of history. When you only look at the fact that Joe Biden is going to get sworn in as president of the United States Wednesday at noon, you will be depressed. I mean, when I watch a video of this guy who clearly is not all there and realize that man, who I think has done horrible things in our nation's history as a senator and as vice president, that man is going to be our president. That is depressing by itself. When I look at Kamala Harris and realize what an airhead she is and how goofy she is and how much of a Marxist she is, and I know she is going to get to be president of the United States because Joe Biden ain't going to last even a year. That in and of itself, by itself, would depress me, okay? But then I step back and I look in the context of history and I go, okay, we've had tough times before. There have been times in our history as Christians in the church, as Kirk Cameron points out in our first episode of Biblical Citizenship, where it was a far worse for believers, far worse for Christians. So when you look in the context of history, you realize it's not as bad as some of those times. And you also have to realize there are answers, there are solutions. But they take time, they take hard work, they take your focus and energy, they take patriots being engaged. And if we're not willing to wake up after this year that we've had, if enough of us are not willing to wake up to be able to win the things that we're talking about here, we don't deserve it. We don't deserve it. But I think we are, because I get the phone calls, I see the emails, I see the thousands of people taking our classes, signing up to be coaches to host our classes, donating to the cause. Those are all reasons why I believe we can win. I look back at the rallies for Trump and I see those hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people across the country that got engaged for the first time. And I say, we can win. We have to give righteous, peaceful ways for those people to vent their frustration and be engaged and give them those action steps. That's what we're about at Patriot Academy. That's why we do what we do. So, despair not. Wait. Be not, how does it go? Let's see, Joshua 1:9. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. That's what we need to hear tonight. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. Don't be dismayed, all right? We got an amazing God. He may take us through some tough times. We may end up in captivity for a while, like just like when he said, I know the plans I have for you. I hope that's not in some ways it is kind of our fate for the next 2 years at least. We're going to be in the captivity of Marxists in our country. But I do believe we do have time, and we do have the peaceable means at our fingertips to defeat them and to have freedom once again.
Just kind of switching gears here for a second. Somebody had asked yesterday, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Somebody asked, do you think the church is going to go underground? And kind of what are some things that we as Christians should be looking for when it comes to church? If our church is not meeting, should we be starting home churches? Do you think home churches are going to have an influx of people joining those and starting those? Kind of what do you think is going to happen to the church?
Yeah, good question. I would say yes in some ways, but only if it chooses not to stand up. For instance, let me just give you an example. I think what is likely to happen in the next 6 months is that some of the lawsuits to open up churches and keep churches open are going to be won at the Supreme Court. Okay, we had the small victory with the first decision on this after Amy Coney Barrett was seated on the court, was the one against Cuomo in New York and in favor of those synagogues, and I think that was a sign of what will happen in the next few months. So I think our friend Ken Graves out in Maine, our friends Jack Hibbs and Rob McCoy in California and others, I think they're going to win at the Supreme Court. And I think, believe it or not, I think the states and the federal government will respect those decisions, and churches will be allowed to open. Now, if your church is not willing to open, then absolutely, yes, start meeting in homes. Or find another church where they are meeting and start having fellowship. I believe that's part of why we're where we are, is just the lack of fellowship for the last 9 months. And so, yeah, go underground if you have to, but I hope you don't have to, and I know you don't have to yet if churches are willing to do the proper thing. And see, here's the thing. They're going to try to redefine what civil disobedience is. They're going to try to redefine that and say, if you stand up at all, you're with those people that broke windows at the Capitol. Now, you're not with the people that burned cities for the last 9 months. So let's keep a moral, what's the word I'm looking for? Moral clarity, and not put those on the same thing. I mean, look, what happened at the Capitol was bad. It was ugly. A few people did die. There's debate over which ones died because of what happened and all that. But yes, no doubt about that. But that is not equal to 7 months of burning cities across the country, and it's not equal to the destruction of freedom of speech. It is not as bad. It was bad, but it is not as bad as destroying our Constitution and literally saying no more freedom of speech in America. That will have far worse repercussions than what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. So don't let people say, if you as a church are meeting and saying we're going to be civilly disobedient, we are not going to follow this law that said we are not allowed to gather, not allowed to peaceably assemble, not allowed to worship our God together, not allowed to sing songs, that is an unjust law. Go read MLK's letter from the Birmingham jail. It's an unjust law. We will not follow it, and we're going to meet. That is proper, peaceful, civil disobedience that is fantastic in the tradition of America's history and should be done by every church in America. They are going to try to say that when you do that, that's as bad as that's going to cause an insurrection. Counter the lies with truth. Civil discourse. Respond every time that happens with truth. Point to the facts. Ask the questions. So, yes, the church must meet if we're going to save the country.
There's been a little bit of a debate breaking out in the chat over the bank situation that you had and whether or not they, as a private company, have the right to decide who comes in and out, what they have to wear when they come in.
They do.
Talk for a second first about the importance of ensuring that private businesses, really no matter what the issue is, have the right to decide that. And then number two, how we respond with market pressure, how that is actually compatible, those two ideas.
Yeah, no, listen, the bank has every right to decide as a private entity what you could be required to wear coming into their lobby. If the bank decides tomorrow that you have to wear a duck hat to be in their lobby because the local school team is the Mighty Ducks, and no one gets to come in without their duck on their head in their lobby. They have the right to do that. That does not violate any constitutional right that I can think of. And so in the same way, they absolutely have the right to tell me I have to wear a mask to come into their lobby. They're a private entity. They have the right to do that. And I have the right, as a private citizen, to say, if you are going to make me wear a mask in your lobby, I will pull my money out of your bank. That is market pressure. That is 100% constitutional, absolutely moral, absolutely ethical, and a pain in my rear. Because that would, when I made that statement, I knew I've got to back this up. This is not a bluff. I will close, I think we have probably, 20 accounts between all the kids, between all the different businesses, the nonprofits, all of it. We got all these different accounts. Well, it would be a pain. But I was ready. In that moment, I said, I am not going to just give in on this. I'm going to make my stand here. And so absolutely you have the right to take your business elsewhere. And that's how we've handled the COVID thing with private businesses. What I can't abide is for government to force that private business to require people to wear masks. Government does not have the authority to make that bank require a mask for me to walk into that lobby. And the reason it doesn't have the authority is because there is no compelling interest. There's zero way to back up a requirement for a mask right now because you can't show a compelling interest. You're not doing it narrowly tailored to only those people that are actually capable of spreading COVID. Now, if you had a regulation that said, if upon entry to the bank, you are tested and found to have not only to test positive for COVID, but to have a fever and coughing and have symptoms, now you could say we have a compelling interest to prevent you from being able to enter a building if you are positive for COVID and symptomatic. You don't have a compelling interest if you're only positive for COVID. Ask Nancy Pelosi. If Nancy Pelosi can allow a member of Congress who tested positive for COVID, not only allow, but demand that she get on a plane, testing positive for COVID, get on a plane in a tube tightly concealed with other people, get to Washington, D.C., walk onto the floor of the House of Representatives, having tested positive for COVID, so that she could vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, clearly that member of Congress was not a threat to anyone in that House chamber. So there's just a piece of evidence, again, civil discourse, evidence to back up my claim that government does not have a compelling interest to force a business to require a mask because there is no danger, and certainly not a high enough. And that's the whole thing, a compelling interest. It's not that there's no danger. You could have a lot of danger, and you still don't have a compelling interest for government to intervene because life is dangerous. But if there's a high enough danger, if tons of people are going to die because I walk in there and make that deposit, then government has a compelling interest to require me to wear a mask. None of that exists. None of it. And that's what people are not willing to talk about right now. So the business has a right to require a mask if they are afraid that you might pose some sort of threat. If they are unwilling to study, if they are unwilling to read the science, if they are unwilling to use logic, and then they have every right to make an illogical, ridiculous requirement for you to walk with a mask from the hostess stand to your table. Now I'm talking about your local restaurant, not your bank. And then take it off and everybody, do whatever they want, right? Illogical, ridiculous, stupid, but that business has a right to do that. And then we have the right to say, taking my business elsewhere. See ya. So that's the very important distinction there.
Yeah. Talk for a second about, a lot of these businesses that are being faced with fines, having their licenses revoked, being shut down, almost being cowered and feared into having those requirements even when they might not believe in them. Just talk for a minute about the best way to push back against that, the likelihood if there was massive pushback that it wouldn't actually be enforced, but because nobody's pushing back right now, they're able to pick off the individual companies that do it. If a lot of them pushed back, they may not be able to enforce it at all.
Yeah, look at what just happened in Italy. I forget the number, but it's thousands of restaurants opened together. They all opened. And the one video that I saw had the police coming into the restaurant and the entire restaurant chanting at them. I think they were even singing. And the police officers left. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's going to take is massive civil disobedience. And I understand, look, if you're on your own, if you're a business owner of a small business and you need to get open or you're going to go out of business, your employees are going to go out, starve. I mean, actually, they got $600 for the government for a whole year, so I'm sure they're going to be just fine. Listen, if you're trying to open for all the right reasons and you're being threatened with losing your license and thousands of dollars in fines and all of those things, I get it. That feels like an impossible situation. And it is easier to just not open and to hope that the government will bail you out. And that's what most people have decided to do. And that's why we're still here 9 months later with all the science and data pointing in the direction of lockdowns haven't helped one bit. If you disagree with my statement, civil discourse, send me a study that shows that lockdowns have actually helped to stop COVID from spreading. Significantly. And in any way, I mean, even if they helped a little bit, in any way correspond to the cost of the lockdowns. And I don't mean just financial cost. I mean lost lives, lost freedom, lost everything. Show me any study that says that it's been worth it. I am shocked that the left hasn't put out manipulated data, because you can make data say things, right? I am shocked that they haven't been pumping out studies to say that, but I haven't seen a single one. The studies that are out there are saying there is no significant difference. There's no statistically significant difference in masks. There's no statistically significant difference in the lockdowns. And that even if you slow the spread and stop the slow the spread, not stop the spread, but even if you succeed in slowing the spread for a little while, that you then reap it on the other end and the spread happens a few months later. There is no stopping COVID. No one has ever believed that you could stop COVID that was making these policies. Now, you may believe it if you've been lied to and the media has given you this mantra that it's going to stop. No one at a government level has ever thought they could stop the spread. That's why the terminology is what? Slow the spread. That's what they've been after. That was the whole goal. But that does not help anybody. The whole reason for slowing the spread was hoping that we wouldn't overrun our hospitals. Even if you do overrun your hospitals, that price is better to pay than the price that we're paying right now in lost freedom, lost lives, lost economy, all of the things that have happened. So anyway, give me a study that says that these lockdowns have paid off, that they have been worth the price that we paid for them, because I've yet to see it, and I would love to read it if it's out there.
Address for a second, there were a couple of comments along the lines of, if a private business required testing, that would be a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. I think there's often a mistaken view that you cannot volitionally abdicate your constitutional rights in terms of you enter a private property that says no firearms, they have the right to require that upon entry. Discuss that a little bit and where that balance is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conflict of rights, and you have to say, who has authority in that establishment. So if I'm on your private property, though I have a right to keep and bear arms, and I believe that constitutional right is clearly stated by the Founding Fathers to be, I have a right to keep and bear arms not just in my own home, but when I go out into the public sphere. But once I walk onto your private property, now we have a conflict, because your private property rights allow you to dictate what happens on your property. And if you don't want to allow me on your property with my gun, you have every right to do so. Your private property right trumps my right to self-defense. So and the reason is because I have a choice at that point, whether or not to go onto your property. If I am being forced to go onto your property, that's a different animal. And you might make the argument, well, if I'm working for someone, I'm being forced. No, you're not. You still have the right and the choice to choose to quit and to not work there. I know that sounds harsh and it sounds, difficult, and it is. And it's morally and ethically wrong for your employer to do that, but constitutionally it's not wrong. They have that right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right, we're approaching an hour and a half. So with 4 minutes left, what would be our last question?
Do you want to talk a little bit
Since
about,
I'm doing 20-minute answers tonight.
just real quickly address biblical citizenship. A few people have asked about that.
Yeah, that's a good positive note to close on tonight, because I am not, I hope you don't think that I'm being flippant about the despair or flippant about the violence at the Capitol and the violence in our cities over the last 8 months now. I keep saying 7 months, but now it's 8 months and they're still doing it. But I guess I'm more optimistic than others, because I'm trying to keep my eye on the prize. I'm trying to keep my eyes on the Lord, to be honest. I'm trying to say, Lord, what do you have for us? What do you want us to do? How can we be faithful where we are? And whatever comes, whatever may happen in the next 6 months or 2 years or 10 years, how do I remain faithful to God? That's my number one responsibility. That's your number one responsibility. And I keep thinking back to what Tim Barton said on our barnstorming tour in Georgia. He doesn't call us to be the successful servant, but to be the faithful servant. Now, there is, in the parable of the talents, some level of he rewarded the success, right? But the point is, the number one responsibility is to be faithful. And that may mean that we have to be faithful in a losing culture war for a while. We may have to be the resistance for a while. And obviously, I have to keep saying this. What I mean by that resistance is a peaceful resistance, peaceful civil disobedience. And that is not to say, just in case anybody's out there that thinks I'm a pacifist, that we would not be willing to defend ourselves. And you have to use violence to stop violence. So gun violence used on a perpetrator is a good kind of gun violence. So if somebody is trying to kidnap your child to rape them, if you use gun violence on that person, that is a good thing, okay? So there is a proper time. That's why I have tried. I hope my terminology hasn't ever come out this way, but a lot of people have said, I'm against violence ever. Never, ever, ever use violence. And no, that's not true. There is a proper use of violence to stop violence. You have to meet the wolf. You have to stop the wolf with violence. But we have everything we need right now to live constitutionally and biblically without being aggressors and without being the ones using violence in an offensive way. There's no need for that. So the reason I'm hopeful is that I see the solutions. I get to interview the people that are on the front lines, that are bringing the solutions to the marketplace in these situations like what's happening with social media. There are market-oriented solutions that I think over the next few months will give us an outlet for freedom of speech once again. My hope is that, what did we see the market cap on Twitter and Facebook drop by, was it 15 billion? It was about 50. Yeah, that's right. It was 50. It was 15 like in the first 24 hours. $50 billion gone from Twitter and Facebook because of their decision to squelch free speech. I'm not sure they recover from that in terms of ever, coming back to that point. Maybe. A lot of it's going to depend on what are you going to do? What am I going to do? At what point do we say I'm gone from Twitter and Facebook? And a lot of people have already made that decision, and they're gone. And I respect that and encourage that and think that's great. And we will probably be there soon. We're trying to give our folks time to get set up and be ready for us. So MeWe, Gab.com, and Parler, that's three places that I'm definitely going, but they're struggling right now. They're really struggling with the technology and catching up and getting the data servers and all that. So in the meantime, while they're doing that, I'm going to keep posting right here. I'm going to do these Facebook Lives till they kick me off, and hopefully keep speaking truth everywhere that we can. So anyway, I'm optimistic. What did Brad Stein always say? He says, I'm an optimistic pessimist, right? So I'm not being pessimistic, but I am being realistic. A rational optimist. That's good. I'm going to adopt that. I'm a rational.
Matt Ridley's term.
Who is it?
Matt Ridley.
Matt Ridley's term. Okay, yeah, I'm a rational optimist. I think that does describe me. And so I see market solutions to a lot of what's happening on the social media front that are going to take time. And then I see political solutions. I think those who have joined the extreme mantra that you are a seditionist for simply using your freedom of speech peaceably, those people are going to pay a political price. I believe we'll defeat them in Republican primaries a year from now. I think there are political solutions to this. And so I think there's sanctuary county solutions. I think there's focusing on a few specific states and making those states cities on a hill. I think the Convention of States is a peaceful political solution to what we're facing right now in terms of our national standoff and split. And so I'm not going to get depressed and give up until I've tried every one of those solutions. I'm going to work hard towards those solutions. And I hope you will as well. What the other side wants is for you to be despondent and to give up. They want you to step back and say, I'm not going to be involved anymore. So if you're willing to give them the victory, I wouldn't call you a patriot. A patriot will keep fighting. A patriot will be ethical and moral. An American patriot will, because an American patriot looks at the history of America wisely. Not just with some tidbit of knowledge and says, well, the founding fathers were violent at the Boston Tea Party, or the founding fathers were violent at Lexington, so it's okay for me to do whatever. That's an ignorant response to history. It's not a wise response to history. It's not actually using knowledge with wisdom. It's not actually even accurate. And so we have to be wise in how we respond to these things. So anyway, I'm a rational optimist. I hope that you will be the same. And take the steps that I've recommended tonight. What was the first one? See who can remember in the chat. What was my first step that I said tonight? Watch the chat and see if anybody answers that question. Because remember, I started off talking about the real problem and the real question. Are we going to have civil discourse or civil war? You can't have... if you don't have civil discourse, you're going to have civil war. So what was the first thing I asked everybody to do? Anybody put it in the chat yet?
Take a second. Yeah, talk real quick about the voting system. If people think it's rigged, how to still participate.
Okay, political solutions to the voting system. So remember, we all here on this Front Porch Live absolutely acknowledge that there was cheating, there was manipulation, there was brute force preventing people from being able to verify votes. There was unconstitutional schemes put in place by governors in these states. There is no question. I believe that, and I think that has been proven. And if we're going to have civil discourse and show evidence, we can do that. And I can point you to the specific laws in those states and the consent decrees entered into by secretaries of state that changed election law unconstitutionally. That part is irrefutable, and anybody that wants to get more on that, we can do that. The fraud itself is potentially refutable because we haven't had a chance to have civil discourse about it and bring the evidence in and show it. I have not yet been convinced of the digital manipulation that a lot of our side absolutely believes happened because I haven't seen that evidence. So I would love to see it and it be proven. I think it's hard to prove because even a printout, you're going to question how to get printed out, who did that. So that part's hard. But remember, that was limited to a few states. So the election system as a whole is not lost. The election system as a whole is in trouble, and there's no doubt we've opened the door for more and more fraud. There has always been fraud. There have always been cheaters. So don't give up on elections. Get engaged in truing the vote, as Catherine Engelbrecht would say, and get engaged in making the election system have more integrity and be able to be more trustworthy. It's never going to be completely trustworthy. And I will say about that, it's 3 simple steps. Absolute transparency in how the votes are cast, absolute verification process, which in my opinion absolutely requires a printed ballot. You cannot have a verification process without a printed ballot that the voter themselves gets to verify before it goes in the box. Okay, so transparency, which means you have to allow, how the system's going to work to be open to both sides. You have to allow when the counting of the ballots is taking place, both sides there. So transparency, verification. You've got to have a recount process when it's close, and actual ballots that people can put their hands on and count. And then legal remedies. You have to allow for the lawsuits to bring forth the evidence. You have to allow for a day in court. You have to allow for a day in Congress. You have to allow for debate. I mean, civil discourse is what we're asking for. Okay, so the election process is not lost. It is hurt, and it is in danger, and we can restore it. But that's going to take some really serious fighting intellectually at the state level, especially in those states where this became obvious. You know, it's different in every state, all right? There are some states that have secure process, I'm sure. You know, Texas is maybe pretty good. I had a long conversation with a good buddy of mine that knows this stuff really well, and he convinced me, you know, a lot of the pieces of our system are secure. Some of the pieces of our system need to be tightened up. And so that's where we get together and we have the discussion, and that terminology is going to get thrown around, election integrity. Everybody's going to label their idea as being election integrity. So let's debate it. Let's have a good legislative process this year in Texas and in all these other states. But that's just going to take hard work. But don't give up on the election process. Okay.
And we need to be discerning, because the left is already going to push like removing voter ID as election integrity.
Yeah, be discerning, because you're exactly right. They're going to take that terminology, election integrity, and they're going to claim, well, that means no voter ID. Election integrity means everybody gets to vote that shows up. Well, of course, that's not election integrity. So be discerning. We need to define our terms. Look for the things that actually work, like, you know, don't have same-day registration. That's, fraught with fraud. I mean, that is opening the door for fraud. Don't have, you know, unlimited mail-in balloting. Don't have voting for 2 months. You know, there's some common sense things here, if we're allowed to have civil discourse to discuss why, that can tighten this up. So don't give up on elections. Participate even in your state when they don't do all the things that we're asking for in election integrity. You still go vote, and you fight hard to improve that system over time. But giving up is not an option. Okay, so remember, I asked, what was the first thing tonight that I said we all needed to do, an action step? Did anybody answer it?
What's the answer?
The answer is create environments for civil discourse in your own living room and at your church.
Yeah, there's like 20 people that said it.
That said that?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that answered.
Very good. All right, so start doing that. Pick a date this week and invite some neighbors over to have some civil discourse. Host a Constitution class to have some civil discourse. ConstitutionCoach.com is where you can sign up. Have that civil discourse at your church by having a biblical citizenship class at your church. BiblicalCitizens.com is where you can sign up. So that's action item number 1, civil discourse in a group where you can look at people's faces and have that conversation. Civil discourse in social media. Civil discourse at the legislature. Go sit down with your legislator, your city councilman, your sheriff, your congressman if you can. That's harder than most of those others I've mentioned. But have civil discourse with them and say, here's a few things I want to talk to you about. Where do you stand on this and where do you stand on that? And don't lose your temper if they disagree with you, and make your arguments for why you want your community to go that direction. That's civil discourse. Let's all commit to creating environments for civil discourse.
Wrap up. Just talk about constitutional defense.
Okay, if you want to come have some civil discourse with us in person, then sign up for our constitutional defense course. That's your chance to come spend several days with us in the classroom, at lunch we get to visit, on the range, best instructors on the planet. You will leave our constitutional defense course so much more confident with your firearm, so much more effective with it. Do not carry a weapon untrained. I think that's asking for trouble. Get trained. I want everybody carrying a weapon trained, okay? So the more people like you and me that have been trained to effectively use our firearm, the less we end up with mass shootings in Walmarts and at music festivals and all of those things that happen. We need to be trained. And so we're excited about how many people are signing up for our courses and coming with us for our constitutional defense course. Just tell you real quick, it's normally $2,000 for this 5-day course that we do, and we only charge $199, so that's 10% of the normal price. Because we have a great partnership with them. Our 3-day course, it's not quite as fun because there's a lot of really cool stuff that we do in the 5-day course that you don't get to do in the 3-day course, but I get it. Some people can't come out for that long, so don't put off your training because you can't do the full 5-day course. Do the 3-day course. You will still get a lot. You'll still get the Constitution training, and you'll still get a lot of the cool firearms training as well. That course is normally $1,000, but we do it for $99. So get signed up today. Come with us. Come spend some time with us. Great fellowship. If you absolutely need to wear a mask because you're either symptomatic, which if you're symptomatic, I'd rather you not show up in the classroom. But if you need to wear a mask because you're in the vulnerable category and you feel like you need to do that, that's okay. Out of the, we usually have about 250 people that come with us to this, and there's usually, I don't know, what would you say, 15 or 20 people that wear a mask. and a couple hundred people that don't. So if you're looking for a place to feel free and have the option and actually get to make the decision yourself instead of it being mandated to you by some dictator acting like they're a governor, can I name some folks? Then if you want to avoid that, then come hang out with us, because we've got a really cool exemption in the Nevada statutes that allows us to do this training without all that junk.
And has ammo, which nowhere else.
Oh yeah, and by the way, if you can't get ammo anywhere, come with us. We got ammo. So we'll be able to give you all the ammo you need for the course. You won't be able to stock up on 10,000 rounds when you come hang out with us, but you will be able to get all the ammo you need for the course itself. And it's priced high, but it's priced the same as everywhere else. Actually, a little less. Well, you can't even get it in most places. But anyway, so yeah, definitely come with us if you want to get some training. I don't know about you, but I'm one thing I'm sure of is there's probably going to be more violence in the streets in our nation. Black Lives Matter and Antifa have not let up one bit, even with Joe Biden in office. Well, they did let up because they had riots planned for about 200 cities if Trump was going to be inaugurated. So they've let up a little. They have let up a little bit. So that was not a good statement. I need to be accurate. See, we need to make sure that we're accurate. So they are not planning to let up completely. Let's put it that way. And they're still being violent in places like Portland. And so they could definitely end up in your neighborhood or in your community, especially as crazy as things are. And even if they don't, go back 12 months ago, the average was 1.2 million violent crimes a year in America. Evil exists. The wolf is out there. That is not to make you frightened. It's to make you cognizant and make you the prudent person that Proverbs talks about. Proverbs says that a fool rushes into danger and suffers the consequences. Don't be the fool. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. Our constitutional defense course is a precaution that every American ought to take. It gives you the skills you need. It gives you the mental awareness that you need to defend your family. So if that's something you want to be a part of, then please come join us. We've got dates past February, but I am trying to get everybody to get trained as soon as possible, because you don't know what's going to happen. All right. That's it. Close us out in prayer. Let's do it. Lord, thank you for this fire, because it's keeping me warm. Lord, I thank you for the fire of liberty and so many patriots across the country. God, I ask you for wisdom and discernment. God, let us be a discerning people. Let us be a wise people that makes wise decisions. Lord, I pray for courage. I pray that we not be dismayed. Lord, I just claim Joshua 1:9 right now, and I ask everybody watching this to pray it, Lord, to pray that they would not be dismayed, that they would be full of courage, that they would not be fearful of COVID, they would not be fearful of the left, they would not be fearful for the future of our country, but instead would be courageous to stand for truth. Lord, to seek that truth, to not be zealots that just repeat things, but Lord, that we would be seekers of truth, that we would verify what we're fighting for, and then we would stand, Lord, as Ephesians says, that having done all, to stand. Give us that kind of courage. Give us that kind of wisdom. Help us save our republic. Father, I don't even ask you to save the old America and somehow make every state in America. We've never been that. But do save the old America that allows each state to be different. Let's save that constitutional republic and let's restore that. God, I just ask you to give us the wisdom to do that, the action steps to do that, and the leaders that will stand up and fight for that. But for every one of us that are on this call tonight, this Facebook Live tonight, Father, that we would each do our part, wherever we've been called to, wherever you've planted us, that we would be faithful, that we would be discerning, we would be wise, we would be courageous. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okie dokie. Have a great week despite what's coming. And don't forget, they're going to take you. But patriots will stand for freedom. We're going to end up with some cities on a hill. We are. I believe that. Let's look for those cities on a hill. Let's look for the places where we can enjoy freedom again. God bless you guys. Have a great night.